Welcome back to Sunrise. Today we're continuing our focus on education as a key indicating factor or determining factor if we need to move our economy forward, and that's what Mr. Oseghale is telling us here today. But some of the challenges that have been recently outlined in terms of why some think we have a huge challenge today with respect to where our education is and the quality of those who go through our education system. Some think we're getting it wrong politically, because there are political considerations when you're supposed to select the best people to get into schools based on merit, and where they eventually end up, they think that if that aspect is taken care of, in spite of the funding challenge that we've got, we still will be making some headway. Do you agree with that?
Well, to some extent, probably maybe like 20%, right? Because what the government is supposed to be doing, people are now doing them themselves, right? I ask you, how much do you pay in school fees for your kids? Now, what we've succeeded in doing is creating a class, right? If you look at the screen, right? Look at all the countries. You find that Nigeria is one of the most populated countries here, right?
Well, as of 2014.
Yeah, as of 2014. Well, we used till 2014 because all data were consistent till 2014. Some have been updated to 2015. But when you go to the next slide, let them put to the next slide, then you see the education expenditure vis-a-vis the population, right? Nigeria was less populated than countries like Britain, Germany in the 60s. But today we've overtaken them. But look at where Nigeria's education expenditure is compared to all the other countries.
That is almost zero.
Yes. See, we've only spent 48 on the federal level, 48 billion in 44 years. 48 billion. Countries like Canada have spent 1.6 trillion. Countries like Brazil have spent 1.5 trillion.
That's in dollar terms?
Yeah, in dollar terms. We've only spent 48 billion. Germany has spent 3.5 trillion in 44 years. United Kingdom has spent 2.7 trillion in 44 years. We've only spent 48 billion. Now, we're not even looking at the intellectual part of this, right? There's another research we're doing, the security part, right? What we did here was to tell you, look, there's a direct correlation between education expenditure and per capita income. The economic model, right, of the Western world is this. They don't believe in mineral resources. They believe in human capital development. We would develop each individual, right? And then you make more. As you make more, it accumulates and gives us what? A bigger GDP. The mineral resources is not the true wealth of a nation. The true wealth of a nation is you and I. And if you develop your human capital, then you will earn more. If I send you to Harvard today, for instance, you come back, you renegotiate your salary, won't you? You'll be a better person. Of course.
I'd like to renegotiate without
exactly.
going to Harvard.
Look, so you look at what we did here was to take the next slide. We took off the OECD countries, right? And then compared Nigeria to just developing nations. You see Thailand and Indonesia, right? We were ahead of them. Asian countries, we were ahead of them in the 80s. Our per capita income was better in the 70s and early 80s. Why? Because we were investing in education. We were developing the education industry then. And it paid off because we gave people the right education, we gave them the right skills.
How do we move from this point
Look,
that we are now?
We are in a, let me tell you the
How
truth.
do we move? As in, what I'm trying to say is that if we have to go the way of investing in human capital development,
yes,
and then the government right now is looking at situations where we increase the barrels per day production of crude oil, for instance, looking at bringing out incentives that will help drive trade in the country. How do you now begin to balance this as to investing in education, as you say?
The first thing is we need to treat education as an investment, not an expense. We've been treating it as an expense. If There's a slide that I made, right, on how countries have increased their education expenditure over years and vis-a-vis their population growth. Nigeria increased the population between 1981 and 2014 by 135% and only increased education expenditure by 53%. Countries like Egypt increased by 1,709%. And that's why we're all going to those countries today to school. But you see, we need to look beyond mineral resources and start to look at the individual, that we, you and I, are the assets of the country. If we do not, we will still be on the wrong track. I'll tell you something. Look, Africa, right, is the richest continent as in mineral resources. The richest continent as in mineral resources. Africa is blessed, right? The whole total mineral resources on earth, Africa alone has 1/3. That's 33.3%. 2/3 of all global mined diamonds, 66.6%, come from Africa. 1/10 of all global oil reserve is in Africa. But yet, Africa is the poorest in per capita income.
Because of education.
What does that tell you? That means that the mineral resources is not the true wealth. You understand? Education, all progressive economies are practicing the knowledge-based economy. And that's what the Asians were not doing in the 70s. They started doing it in the 80s and now have surpassed us. We were doing it in the 70s, we were ahead of them. But when we stopped, they picked up. And today, they are ahead of us. So if you look at the per capita income of all the Asian countries now, they are ahead. And that's because they adopted the knowledge-based economy. If you do not see the individuals, if you don't see the citizens of the country as your asset, right, you will forever be behind.
So which of the models are we? Is it the Lewis structural change that we're following? Which of the models do you think, or is it the Harrod Dorman models that Nigeria is going with now?
I really don't know about that, but the truth is, what I see happening, right, if we need to move forward, right, one of the key things we need to do is follow the infrastructural development. What do I mean? If you've ever read the book or followed Jeffrey Sachs, right, he keeps saying, there's a saying he keeps consistently, repeating, that education plus healthcare plus infrastructure, right, practiced in a free market, right, equals unlimited potential growth. Now, what does that tell you? Your fiscal policy, right? Make sure that your fiscal policy takes a lot of your budget. What we've been doing is we've been having a lot of recurrent expenditure take a chunk of our budget for years, right? And those three things I said, healthcare, education, and infrastructure, are supposed to be part of the what? Current expenditure, right? And if we are able to reverse the trend of our budgets, okay, let's the recurrent expenditure probably maybe take 20-25% of the budget and pump in as much as 70-75% into current expenditure. Honestly, this country will move forward. And I believe that was what we were doing in the 70s.
Well, very interesting perspectives, but yeah, clearly we'll have a job of work to do on this matter. But we'll have to appreciate you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
We look forward to perhaps hosting you again in the days ahead, or maybe whenever you're in the country.
Thank you.
Roman Oseghale is a business survey analyst. He's also a development and economic researcher. I appreciate you coming on this morning.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.